All right, welcome everyone. My name is Jeff Smith, and I am accompanied here by my partner in crime, Brian Spendolini. We are product managers on the database team, and database is a huge playground of amusements and horrors. We're personally responsible for helping out with database tools. So that's generally thought of as the SQL developer universe, but we also have a data modeling solution. We've moved SQL Developer over into your web browser with SQL Developer Web. We've got REST APIs, and then we've also got our command line interface, which is SQLcl, and that's what we're here to talk about today. And we kind of have a little birthday theme going. I wish I could give you folks cake. Maybe I'll try to bring a cake to our first physical event that we have. I just have to someone will have to remind me. So just to repeat the basics of the format on these sessions, yes, it's being recorded. And so I know this is going to be super awesome and everyone's going to love it. My advice is not to take notes and try to reproduce everything you're seeing on screen as we do it. Just sit back and kind of soak it all in and look for 2 or 3 things that you can immediately go and investigate later in terms of, putting into your normal workflow. That's my goal anyway, so everyone walks away with 2 or 3 things. And as we're going through this, if you're not seeing 2 or 3 things, or if I'm going over something too quickly and you want to ask a question, we have the Q&A interface. Brian's going to be helping me with that because I talk too much and I'd have a hard time clicking over to the Q&A to take a breath. The recording will be posted and linked to from the site later this week. Sometimes we were able to do it the next day or same day. And the slides also will be made available. I'll have a recap of this on my blog over at thatjeffsmith.com. And if you're interested in product news and notes specifically for SQLcl and you're on the Twitter, we have an Oracle SQLcl Twitter account. So you can skip all of my boring personal life stuff and just follow the tools. All right, so let's get into it. So I told you briefly what our team is responsible for. We try to cover all of the bases, I guess, to make an American sports analogy. So regardless if you spend most of your time in a desktop GUI tool, or if you're in your browser, or if you're really in Postman or curl, or if you're from Z Shell or Bash or Windows command prompt, we want to have what you need to be successful for the Oracle database there and that database SQL and PL/SQL experience and across all of those universes. So these are the products our team's responsible for. And if you want to learn more, you can go to oracle.com/SQL developer, oracle.com/ords, oracle.com/SQLcl. And that's where you'll find download links and documentation and product tutorials for all of these things. Or of course, you can always just Google it. Oh, by the way, I used to do this talk called the command line versus the GUI. And it was always a fun talk because everyone has a very firm opinion, just like they have a firm opinion on whether VI or Emacs is better. And really, there's no winner. The winner should be you. You need to be using whichever environment or interface or tool best suits your needs at the time. So my goal today is not to convince you to dump your REST client or your desktop tool or your web browser to jump over into a command prompt. Really, it's to say, hey, if you like working in the command prompt, or if you're curious what you could get from a command prompt experience, this is what SQLcl brings to the table. And it's what we've built over the last 5 to 6 years. So today's a sort of a celebration of its being an official product for 5 years, and also to show, if I had an hour elevator pitch, if we were going to take an elevator up 3,000 flights and I had a full hour to show you, this is why I think you should be using the tool, or this is what you can get out of it. That's the purpose of this talk. And if we look at the history of interfaces for the Oracle database, they really go back to when the Oracle database itself first came out. And SQL Plus was not the first interface. It was UFI, user-friendly interface, which kind of morphed into SQL+. And as best as I can figure out, talking to people that were working before I was working, SQL+ kind of made its introduction to the universe in version 5 of the database, all the way back in 1985. And then there were several iterations of SQL+. So we still have the pure command prompt SQL+ that ships with the database and with all the Oracle clients. But then we also got sort of a Windows, GUI is not the right word, but like a dedicated Windows app for SQL+. Instead of going to command prompt and launching SQL+, there was actually a SQL+ program you could run in Windows, which still gave you that SQL+ command line interface experience, but it kind of gave you a little bit more, which you got over command Windows. And then once the internet got plugging away, everyone's like, well, hey, we have to have web versions of everything. So it's not like we invented this concept of SQL Developer, put it in the web. iSQL+ had that many, many years ago. So since iSQL+ and SQL+, the GUI or the SQL+ Windows things came out, they've both been deprecated, but SQL+ still lives with us. And so we went from command prompts only, and then also in this mid-90s range, we also had the first version of Enterprise Manager. So EM started off as a, I don't know if it was a Java, I can't remember what, but it was a desktop tool that you installed that you could run. And that was sort of the first GUI or graphical user interface from Oracle for the database. And then that went and became the OEM that we know in the browser today. We had a class of users that wanted a better desktop experience. So they wanted a lot of the things they liked in SQL+, but they wanted a lot of the things they didn't like about a command line experience that they could get, you know, with things like a mouse. And so that became SQL Developer. And then that quickly grew from, you know, Project Raptor in 2006 or 7 into this product today that has somewhere between 5 and 7 million users around the world using it. And then in 2014, 2015, our team started kicking around the idea of, hey, you know, command line's not going around or isn't going away. If anything, command line's sort of seeing this resurgence or romance. I think cloud has a lot to do with that because, you know, you're spinning up a VM or you're spinning up a compute node somewhere, you're accessing your resources from a terminal. And we're not going to do a remote desktop GUI into some VMware or some, you know, Docker container running in a data center somewhere. We basically are going to come back to those terminal days. So our team decided to, again, try to take everything that you liked about SQL+ and all the things that you liked about SQL Developer and build that into a new command line interface. And that's what CLCL is. So that came out officially in 2016, hence our 5-year anniversary and our little birthday party today. And starting in 2017, our team went from annual or like semi-annual releases to quarterly updates. So I think July of 2017, we had CLCl version 17.2. Each calendar quarter, you know, so January to March, that's .1, and then .2, .3, .4. We have a release for CLCl, and we just had an update for CLCl. So I'll be showing you 21.3 today, and maybe I'll tease some stuff that's coming in 21.4, which would be the end of the year. If you're on Windows, well, we posted an update for 21.3 yesterday, but it was specifically to fix a rendering issue in Windows. So if you're on Windows, make sure you go and get 21.3.1. I just posted yesterday. All right, so let's get into the bulk of the material. So here is where you can go click to access our product pages. So it's literally oracle.com/SQLcl. That was Brian's smart idea to create that short code. Thank you, Brian. And these, when people ask me like, hey, why would I consider CLCl when I've got SQL+? These are sort of the things I lead with. So automatic formatting, No more, imagine you're trying to convince your kid to go into databases and you show them the results of a query that haven't been gone through the SQL Plus reporting facelift, and they just type, select star from their favorite table, and just all this stuff splats to screen. That's not a friendly experience, especially for people that have been doing Oracle for 30 years, 20 years, even 15 years. We know the deal there. We know how to work around that, but we wanted to have a nice experience for everyone from day zero. So we have this automatic formatting. When you log in and run queries, we print it to screen to fit for you. You can turn that off if you don't like it. Query history. So as you run things, scripts, queries, set commands, anything, although we do have a filter to block certain things, that gets written to a persistent history that'll be available to you the next time you start up the product. This next one, JavaScript, this is sort of like an advanced feature, but there's so many things you can do in JavaScript. So we made this feature using a command called script. You can write, doesn't have to be just JavaScript, it could be Python or various other languages, but primarily JavaScript. You can do things to interact with what's happening with your connection or what's happening with the output you're getting from your database on the client side. And I'll show an example of that. We've built new commands. Obviously, a new interface thought fresh, what are the things people are doing most frequently in the database? Maybe instead of writing a 300-line PL SQL block to make something happen, we just turn that into a command with arguments. So those are no-brainers. Obviously, we can't think of everything, so we also gave you the ability to create your own commands. VI and Emacs are as old as forever, and there are ways that you can configure things like SQL Plus to use VI and Emacs, but we wanted that to not be extra work or a hack. We just wanted it integrated, built into the system. So we have an inline editor, which I'll show, but it's just kind of not GUI, but just, arrowing around the buffer and changing stuff. That's all there, but you can also switch to VI and Emacs mode and take advantage of all those keyboard shortcuts. We built in the ability to do change management on your databases. So as developers, as you're writing code, as you're building things, if you want to take a snapshot of your dev environment and publish that as a Liquibase change set, we do all that work for you. And it's much more than what I just said, but I'll cover that later today. OCI used to mean one thing, but what it means today is Oracle Cloud, basically. So not everyone's using the Oracle Cloud. If you are using the Oracle Cloud, I'll show you some things we've built into CLIs that just make working with databases and resources in the Oracle Cloud easier. And then finally, I've got these last two things in italics because they're not officially released yet. We have command line interfaces for Data Pump and Data Guard today, but we're burning those into CLIs. So by default, if you have CLIs, you'll be able to do Data Pump and Data Guard stuff. And that's on the roadmap for 21.4, which is end of year. So one of the nice things about CLIs, you can run it anywhere on any operating system that supports Java. The predominant ones by far are Windows. That's like 95% of our users, then 4 or 5% on Macs. And then after that, the smattering of Linux variants. I will say on the Linux side, the one that predominantly gets tested here is Oracle Linux for obvious reasons. However, let's say you have a Oracle Cloud account. If you're in the Cloud Console and you launch this thing called Cloud Shell, which is literally a button you click in the browser once you're logged into your cloud environment, this dropdown comes and you've got instant command line interface on a compute node in your OCI network. Installed in that environment by default is CLIs. So in the Oracle Cloud, CLIs is basically everywhere by default. And in this screenshot, I've just got an example of making a API call to download my wallets, which are used to encrypt the network traffic from the client to the database. And once I've got that pulled down, there's a simple command in CLIs to say, here's my wallet. and then I can say, show me the entries in my TNS file, show TNS. And then I can connect to that. So I didn't have to install anything in that case. We made a recent change in the license and distribution for SQLcl. And so this is called the Oracle Free Use License, or FUTC. I think what it means at the end of the day is you don't have to have an Oracle single sign-on, and you don't have to click through any agreements. You can literally bookmark this URL and pull it down however you want, whenever you want, from wherever you want, assuming you can hit that address. So there will be a versioned download, which would have like SQLcl-23.1. So you can get the specific one, but if you always just want to get the latest one, if you trust us, then you can just bookmark SQLcl latest zip. So you could have an automated curl script to go get that whenever you want it. No more clicking, no more agreeing, no more signing up for accounts. This is also true for ORDs, and we're in the process of getting this done for Data Modeler and SQL Developer. So end of the day, the tools are being built to make your jobs and lives easier. And so we're just trying to remove any barriers. And I know one of the barriers is signing up for those accounts and clicking through the down, so why you shouldn't need to do that for these tools, because they're all included with your database. And if you haven't bought a database, they're free anyway. So that's one of the big achievements that we got kicked off this year, was changing these licenses. And then finally, this is relatively new too. If you want to use SQLcl in a container, so if you're not working with the Oracle database every day, why not? Shame on you? No. But if you're building applications across different platforms, and this week you need to work on your Oracle project, you could get a container for the database, and you could also get a container for SQLcl. And then you've got nothing physically installed on your machine. You can just call these up as necessary. So there are containers for ORDs. There are containers for the database. And you just need to just basically Google Oracle Container Registry. And then there's a big block there on that homepage that says databasey stuff. And then once there's an entry for ORDs and SQLcl. Is there a Kate's image for SQLcl? This is the image that we have right now. We're working on, Brian, do you want to talk a second for what's being worked on in terms of the Kate's operators?
Yeah, we have a lot of that. I think it's almost done, or it's just about done. It's going to be released into the Docker containers. But I mean, at any point when setting it up, you can always, if you're using OCI, you can yum install SQLcl and it'll pull it down. And I believe SQLcl is also in the general Linux repository. So if you're somewhere else and you're hooked into the general Oracle's repository, yum repository, you can grab it there as well and just install
ORDs is in that repo. SQLcl is on its way to that repo.
I thought it was in there already.
I might have gotten it backwards. I have a blog post on how to install SQLcl.
They're in the OCI repo.
SQLcl.
And I think they should be in the regular one by now.
Okay, cool. So maybe instead of starting with the list of the commands, I should show how you actually download and install this thing, which is important. So there is no installer. You're going to get this zip file off our website. You're going to download it, and you're going to extract this to a directory somewhere. I personally don't care where you put it. I put mine in C:\SQLcl. And I've got lots of stuff here. I used to put things in program files, but Windows does special things to XCs and stuff living in program files, and it kind of makes a pain in the butt. So I would say don't put this in program files. Put it somewhere where you'll remember where it's at. Once it's there, and there's a couple things you can do. I know a lot of people like Conemu and some other Linux emulators. I'll just go straight to the command prompt. And and then I'll just launch the application. So if I do a dir on bin, there's a SQL and a SQLexe. The SQL is a bash or batch script that you can use on Linux, and the exe is made for Windows. So I don't update my path every time I do a download because I've got like 12 versions of this. So I'll just, basically cd to here and say SQL. We could do no log. So exactly the same as SQL Plus. So I'm logged in without a connection. The only thing I have to use these tools is a Java runtime environment, or Oracle Java. I don't have to have a client. I don't need a TNS names file. Now, if I have a TNS names file, CLCL will look for those and use them if we can. And in this case, I ran show TNS to say, hey, tell me what you found. And it's like, look, I'm looking in 1 or 2 places and I couldn't find anything. You don't have a TNS names file set up. But if you know where it's looking, if you have a TNS names org, you can just paste it there. You don't have to do a full Oracle client install just to take advantage of TNS. Once I'm in here, I can connect. So we support Easy Connect, we support LDAP, we support TNS aliases, we support JDBC URLs. We basically support all of the connect strings that you'd have with SQL Plus. But I'm just going to say connect, and then I could do optionally if I want to say this is on my machine, on this port, and then in this case, we recommend you use the PDB name or service name. But I don't need to do this. I can just do this. And I'm connected. So I am connected. And if I want to know anything about my connection, I can say show connection. And it tells me what's going on. It's telling me what that connection string is and the database that I'm connected to and the version of the database that I'm on. Where did my show go? Where's my resume? There we go. So all of the commands are documented. There is a book for CLCL, and there's a link to that documentation if you go to oracle.com/CLCL. But you can also read the help that's burned into the commands. So if you want just a list of the commands, help is here. And you'll see all of your favorite SQL Plus commands, slash, at, break, column, define, describe, exit. Those are the ones that aren't underlined. The ones that we've added on top of SQL Plus, those are underlined. So I've got things that you can probably guess what they do. Like there's one called CD, you can guess what that probably does. There's a command in here called DDL, you can probably guess what that does. These are the things that we didn't really find missing from SQL Plus. So we just found that, hey, if you had these things, you'd probably use them. And we had interfaces for this already built in our other core products. And so we just put it into this headless or this command line version of SQL Dev. The zip that you download, it's only like 35 megabytes. So there's no Oracle client install required. It's only 35 megs, and it's burned into all of these free places online. So, if you want to get started with the Oracle database, CLCL is probably the easiest way to get into it. All right, so I was talking about the automatic formatters. So as I run queries, I'm not going to try to type too much today because I'm a bad typer and I can't spell. So CLCL knows how wide my window is. It runs the query, it does a fetch. In this case, the fetch size I think is 50 or 100, but I told the query only grab the first 10 rows. But for each page of results, we look at the output first and we look to see how wide the values are. And then we're like, okay, smart print this stuff per page. So if I were to say set page size 10, and run this query, you can see these things kind of move around a little bit from page to page. And that's because some people have longer phone numbers or longer names. And we're just smart printing that. So if you're OCD like me and that drives you nuts, you can just say set page size 200 and run that query again, and it'll all be formatted exactly the same straight down the middle. So this is what you get logging in, setting nothing. This is the default. But we give you lots more toys than that. So CSV, SQL Plus even now has CSV output. You can set at the statement level, at your session level, what you want the output mode to be. So session level, you say set SQL format. If you put that in a login script, that'll just be your default going forward. So if you wanted to counter our smart formatting and you always wanted one of these others, then you could just put that into a login script. Or you can burn it into the query itself. So if I say set SQL format to delimited, and I always like doing funky delimiters just to show you what crazy customers like to do. So I'm saying I want my columns delimited by that pipe hat pipe, and I want the strings opened and closed with single quotes. And then I ran my query again. Here is those same 206 employees-ish in that format. If I say show SQL format, it's telling me what my format is. If I say help set SQL format, this is a big help page because you got lots of options. But in general, we try to give you examples too. JSON is the format of the day. So if I say set SQL format, JSON formatted, that means pretty printed. And then I run my query again. This is me using the history feature. So there's those 10 rows as JSON documents in an array. And the first thing we've got is a description of the columns followed by the items in that collection, basically. Now, once I've set this, it's permanent until I unset it. So that could be annoying. So what you can do is say set SQL format to ANSI console. Now, ANSI console is what we called that smart formatter. I can leave it there, but then when I want to deviate that from the format, I can do this too. I can say select, insert, star from locations. And we give you an insert script. So we know the table name, we know the column names, we give you the values, and we just write that for you. And when I run my other query again, it's still an ANSI console because it didn't have that comment in the header. Q&A. Okay, Brian, I'm going to let you catch the questions because I'm going too slow. Okay,
yeah,
so
but actually, there's one that I'm sure a lot of people would actually want to know. So that's great that I did that JSON output. So what if I wanted to spool it to a file so I can insert it via REST service or something? How would I best do that?
Oh, you're getting crazy complicated on me now. All right, so let's do CSV just because it's cheaper. So I'm going to say set SQL format CS. Oh, let's do inserts for giggles. Set SQL format insert. What are we going to do? I'm going to say set feedback off. And let's do this. Let's CD to users, JD Smith. So what CD does is it says this program will now look for files in this directory and it will write files to that directory. In SQL Plus, I think you'd always have to exit, go to the directory you wanted to be, then come back in. That was annoying. So that's why we made the CD command. It also makes scripting stuff a lot easier. So now I'm going to do this. Spool regions.sql. I'm going to say DDL regions. This takes a second. So what we're running in the background is a DBMS metadata package call to get the DDL for this table. And now I'm going to say select star from regions. And I'm going to say spool off. And we can say, show me the contents of this. So there is that region SQL file, and guess what's in it? I've got everything I need to create this table and populate it in that file. Using what you saw as a mix of SQL plus tech, spool, and some of the newer stuff like these set SQL formats. So you said the easiest way. I don't know about the easiest way, but that's a pretty easy way to do it. I said set feedback off because I didn't want that 200 rows selected message in my script. If it's in there, you can always go in and take it out manually, but you can use the set commands just like you can in SQL Plus to influence what comes back out to the screen. So these three commands I use a lot: help, set, and show. Help shows me all of the commands. Help command name gives me a detailed inventory of what that command can do with examples. The set command allows me to set program attributes, and the show will tell me what things are set to. So I showed you show connection. We've also got show Java. We've got show JDBC. What else do we have? We have show all. This is a SQL Plus thing, but this basically shows you everything. By the way, it's not technically everything, but it gives you a lot. If you want to see everything, show all plus. So like NLS parameters and file encoding, keyboard shortcuts, all kinds of stuff in here. Editing, this is where it gets really fun. So let's do some quick demo. Select one from dual where 1 equals 2, fetch first 5 rows only. So I can do Control R to run this right now. I can also use my arrow keys and come in and around the buffer and change stuff. So I can do that if I want. Oh, look, I still got my set SQL format. So set SQL format. Let's see. Console. And just like in SQL Plus, slash says, rerun what's in the buffer. Up arrow, I can get back to my query and I can change stuff. Control R runs that. So that's what I mean by inline editor. I'm going to resize my screen here for a second. So at the bottom of this screen is a status bar, which is telling me some things. It's telling me I'm on line 1, cursor position 0. I'm connected as HR to the ORCL instance. This is my edit mode. This is VI insert mode. So basically, I'm in VI, but the append mode is on. So I can always just type and do stuff. I forget what I have this set to. And this right here, this might be my, my Git project, my Git repo. And then this right here is how long it took for me to run the last query. So begin dbms lock sleep 5. See, it's seeing me right now. I'm on line 2, cursor position 19. Hopefully SQLcl doesn't make me a liar, because the database is now going to sit there and do nothing for 5 seconds. Then it came back, and you can see that database time on top of the client communication and rendering time is almost 7 seconds. So 06.957. That's how long the client observed for this entire thing to go for. Let's do something a little more for a longer query. There we go. So I can come in here. Oops. I can come in here and I can switch to VI mode if I want. So if I want to nuke this entire line, I need to change edit modes. So I'm going to hit escape. It's about a half heartbeat longer than I want it to take, and we're working on that. But you can see that I've gone from VI insert to VI command. What's the command, Brian, to delete a line? DD, right?
It is DD.
So that command is gone. I'm sorry, that line is gone. Now I'm still in VI command mode, so I'm technically trapped forever if I don't know colon quit. But if I hit escape, it switched back to, no, it's supposed to switch back to VI insert mode. Now if I hit Control R, it runs that, and of course it breaks because I deleted a line that it needed. If I say show key map, I get all my keyboard shortcuts. And they should be really close to not the same as the defaults for VI. There may have been some conflicts there. There's technically a couple of different VI modes. There's a VI visual mode. And what VI visual mode allows you to do is take the cursor and like move around and select multiple lines of code. Yes, we also support Emacs. The default is VI because not because VI is better, which it is, but because more people use VI. And so if you want to change that, that's a, help set editor. There's your options. All right, I get tired of typing clear screen, so I say alias CLS equals clear screen. I burn that in and SQLcl remembers it forever, and now I can just hit CLS whenever I want to clear a screen. Oh, the status bar. Yep. So actually, I've got the prompt. So just like in SQL+, we've got something called SQL prompt that you can set. And yes, that can be dynamic. I showed you how to set the editor. And then the status bar thing's pretty new. So it's not on by default. You have to turn it on. And then once it's turned on, you tell us what things you want included on the status bar. So line column, username, DBID, transaction. So if you have commits pending, it'll show you there that timing and then edit mode. I'm not using my current working directory, the encoding, my Git project or Git working directory, or the version of Java. So I could add these if I wanted. And help set status bar. Again, lots of examples here to turn these things on and off. And I just showed this. 20 minutes left. I think we're doing okay on timing. And I show key map. History. Okay, so let's talk history. There's a lot to go over with history. So SQL+ recently added history too, which is good. It should have been there a long time ago, but they've got it now too. So if you're on a really new version of SQL+, they have the CSV and the history stuff, but there are some subtle differences. SQLcl, the history is persistent. So you could run something today, come back next week, and it'll still be in your history list. We don't save everything by default. So we have filters. For example, connect strings often have passwords in them. And if someone gets access to your machine and they go through the history file, or if they get into a SQLcl session, you don't want to have passwords littered in your history. So we hide those by default. Do not show failed statements. So we'll put them in the history for your current session, but then when you exit out, we don't write queries or scripts that don't work to the history. So we don't want to litter your history list with 400 broken SQL queries. You're just going to get the ones that work. So I'm going to make this bigger now so it's not distracting again. If I type history, it prints the entire history. And they're numbered. So let's say I wanted any of these really. I just type history and that number and it puts it into the buffer. So I don't. It's also ordered by the first one in, last one, or first one in, first one, last one out. Is that philo? So if I say history 283, that's in the buffer. It hasn't ran it. And now to run it, I can just say run, and it runs that again, which gives me a 5-second chance to take a breather. If you want to change those history settings, help set history. So that filter there is where you can add commands. So if you never want to see a set command in your history list, you would just add the set to the list in the filter. And if you want to see your failed queries, because it takes you a long time to get things right, and you want to show your boss the progression of a query where you started and the 12 versions of it until you finally got it working, just turn the failed on, and then you can see all of those in your history list.
Hey, Jeff, is there a way to search our history?
No, I want that feature, but we don't have it yet. That feature is in the desktop. So SQL Dev Desktop and CLIs both have the same feature, but they have separate history lists. These are stored in a text file in your personal working directory. So in Windows, it's under app data, and on Mac and Linux, it's in a .CLCL file in your user home directory. So you could manually search that file and pull them out, but we don't have the history list. If everyone wants that, go tweet us, and then I can use that as a proof that my request for adding search was not a crazy one. Up and down arrow key allows me to go up and down in the history. Okay, code completion. So let's demo all of that real quick. So select star from employees. I'm so sick and tired of employees. Where tab. Here is the full list of columns for employees. EM, if it filtered it down, and you can see where it's matched those. Yeah, that's the only one. Hit tab again, it completes. Now, if I'm smart, and here's the one that I hate typing the most, I can just say where com tab, and there's only one hit, so it just auto completes. Is not null. Well, I was on a webinar once and I heard Brian say never use stars in your queries. So I can come up here, backspace that, and I can say I want first name, last name, salary, and commission percent. And I don't have to go to the end and hit enter. I can just say Control R and it runs that. I want to add an order by, up arrow, add a line, order by 3, 4. Is that valid? Yeah. So now it's ordered by salary and commission lowest. Oh, I thought I told it to, oh, it did descending on commission. No. I did something there wrong. Okay, so that is one version of tab completion for column names and object names, but it's much more interesting than that. I can say alter session tab, and it gives me the next keyword. Or I could say create table, Brian, trees, and V tab, and it says, hey, it's varchar, varchar2, and then also virtual or visible show up in the syntax tree. Enter. So I've got that. And then the other thing I have are for local files. So I want to run a script in my current working directory. So I can say show, what do I say? Is it CWD? No, show SQL path. So I'm in the user's JD Smith. So I can say, let's do this. Show me all of the dir star.sql. So I've got those 3 things in my, who wants to type that first thing out? Not me. So tab completion on the file names. That's where tab completion is right now. And if you could think of something else that we need to add, let us know. So column names, object names, keywords, even data types for creating tables, and file completion. I'm gonna have to go really fast now. I've got 13 minutes left. Everybody knows describe, right? It tells me the columns, their nullability, and their types, and that's it. And there is utility there. It's super fast, and if that's all you want, then it's all you need. And CLCL has the describe command, but we also decided you might want more than this. So we created a command called information, and the short code for information is info. So if I say info on a table, we'll tell you, hey, by the way, this is actually a table. It could have been a view, it could have been a synonym, you don't know, but this is a table. And we're going to tell you what we know about the table. So when it was last analyzed, and then what the basic stats are from that last time the stats were collected. There's an in-memory feature in the database where you can pin tables. We show you the state of that for your table. And then if the modeler and the DBAs were nice, or the developers were nice, they might have comments on the tables, and the columns themselves will print those. Then we still print the column lists. Now we add a little bit. So primary keys are denoted with the asterisk. And then here are those comments. Oh, I think we added defaults. And then after that, we print a list of indexes. And then not a list of all of the constraints, but a list of the referential integrity constraints. So the foreign key constraints. And in this case, regions just has the constraint tying to countries. So that's info. One of our community members, real performance nerd, Tanel Potter, you may have heard of him, uber genius. He asked, hey, I want to see more statistics and I don't need the comments. So we built for him and shared with everyone this info plus command. So in this case, instead of showing you the column comments, we show you the column stats. So what's the low value, the high value, the number of distincts, and whether or not there are any histograms. So if I say info plus on employees. Now this takes a little bit longer to run than describe takes because we're grabbing more info. So it's up to you whether or not you think that tax is worth paying. So here I've got the high-low values and distincts and histograms on all of the columns. Adam, Winston, 2,100, 24,000. Someone's making a little and someone's making a lot. No one's ever told me if history or salary on employees, if that's monthly or yearly. Hoping it's monthly. There is no describe on stored procedures, but we added one in CLCl. So if you do info on a stored procedure, we will print for you the anonymous block required to execute the stored procedure. So we put it into the buffer. So you can go in and edit and get a easy to run bit of code to execute this stored procedure. I'm pretty sure someone asked for that. We didn't build that out of the box. Someone said, hey, it'd be nice to do this too. So, that's what we're trying to do with the tools, is build stuff to make things easier. So I printed that command list and I said, hey, here's all the new ones. I can't demo all of the cool ones, but there are certain ones that I try to always hit. So I've already shown you CD. It's just nice to be able to change your perspective of where you're at on your machine as you're writing stuff and reading stuff. And spool, we talked about that. I think I maybe even anticipated someone's question about the easiest way to generate these files, but here I did a CD and a spool, so you've seen that before. DDL, and you saw me do this live. So DDL object name, and we generate the DDL. It's just like going into SQL Developer, clicking on an object, opening it, and going into the SQL page. Now, a lot of people hate seeing certain things in their DDL scripts. So the one that I'm always turning off is like set DDL segment attributes off and set DDL. You can do all this in one line if you want, but I never do. schema off and set DDL. Oh, I think partition. We should have command completion on that. So DDL employees. This is not magic. It's just a DBMS metadata package call. It's actually 3 or 4 calls because there's one for dependent objects and there's one for comments, and we just kind of chuck them all together for you. So 2 words got me this. Which was a lot. It saved me a lot of work. And again, I can just spool that to a file, and now I've got my DDL script. CTAS, acronyms. I hate acronyms, but in this case, most people know what it is. We build for you, we don't run it, a create table as select. Now, create table as select is cool, but it has a very major weakness. If you have a partition table, if you've got primary keys, if you've got indexes, you lose all of them on a CTAS. So what we did is we built a command called CTAS, and it's got 2 parameters, your object name and your new object name. And then what we take is the DDL for that object, we substitute out the names, and then we give you everything, so you don't lose anything. Now, we don't run this for you. It's in the buffer, so I can go into the edit mode and take the things out that I don't want. You might have to change the names of partitions, for example, to get it to run, or you might decide you don't want all the indexes. But all this is now generated for me, and I have a very, I would say quick and dirty, but a quick and pretty create table as select. And we wrap it at the end with as select star from, I think, on the object. Maybe you don't want all the rows. Maybe you don't want no rows. So you just add a where 1 equals 2 predicate to not get the data. This one's fairly new. You know, SQLcl's 5 years. I think this command's maybe 1.5 years old. And it does exactly what you think it's going to do. So it's going to take data in a file and it's going to put it into a table. And it's actually nicer than that. This is just the simplest way to demonstrate it. Set SQL format CSV, spool a query format to a CSV file, and then take that same file and point it to a table. And we expect the first line to have the column names. You don't have to have that. These are all these options you can set on and off. I could say column names off, and then it's not expecting that front row. You can even say, hey, I need you to skip 5 rows before you read the data in. If this sounds familiar to like what we have in the GUI, it's because it's the exact same code. It's just been refactored for this headless, command line environment. And then you can run that, and we shove the data into the table. What if the table doesn't exist yet? Well, guess what? We can read the CSV file, and we can guess what that table should look like. We'll generate and create the table for you, and then load the data in for you if you want. So that's super nice. You might want to just look at the CSV and not actually create the table. You want to like get a quick and dirty data model out of it. There's a flag you can say to only print the DDL for me. So on a CSV, I can say, oh, I've got these 5 date columns, they're dates. I've got these varchar 2s, and the widest string we could find was 50 characters long. So we go through your file. Let's say you got 10 million rows. The default is we look at like the first 100 rows to get those column shapes. If you don't want to run into that annoying thing where you do a load and it's like, oh, everything ran except for these three rows because they had wider columns than normal, just set the read limit setting to a really high number. Now this takes more memory, but we'll go through all of the data to make sure all of the rows are properly shaped and put that in there. What I'm not showing on screen, which I'm going to in a second, is these are local files in local tables. I could pull files out of the Oracle Cloud to load my tables if I want. I was playing with Strava data the other day and caught my boss's eye, and he's like, how did you get that data? So I showed him and he pulled it down, and it's like, I don't know how many files this is, Chris, like 30 different CSVs. And he set scan rows to 5,000, and then he said load the CSV file new. So our code looks at the name of, he's specifying the table here. So he's pulling the tables in these files, and he wrote this little one line bash script and dynamically generated these commands and then ran it. and blew those tables up from 0 rows to a few 10,000 rows. Super, super easy. These text files will have dates in there as strings. Our code's smart enough to look through there, look for the date formats implied in those strings, and automatically shape the dates, the strings to the dates, so they don't fail. Now, if you've got a dirty CSV where like dates are in different formats, it's going to pick the format that it sees the most frequent. Oh, and here's how to get just the DDL. So you just say load table, and then on the end add show DDL, and then here's the DDL that you would generate for this CSV file. So these column size are not arbitrary. They're reflecting the biggest string we found. Is that a good data modeling practice? No, but it's at least wide enough to get all of the data. So this is one of the brand new things. This command is scheduled for end of year. So very simple, like data pump export will automatically create a job and run a schema export for my current user and write it out as a dump file having the same name as my schema user. And that's in lieu of several dozen lines of PL SQL. So it is using the PL SQL API the database gives us to run data pumps. So that means we can do pretty much anything we want with it, exports and imports. And the idea is we want to make it as easy as possible for a development environment or even smaller production environments to say, hey, I'm connected in CLCL. Let me data pump this out. And then once I have that file, can you move it someplace, like say the Oracle Object Store, which is kind of like your S3 data bucket for all things in a cloud environment. And then we can just say data pump import and tell us which file it is. In this case, it would be a URL or a URI that references that file in the object store bucket, and will automatically import it in. So it could be as few as 2 or maybe 3 commands to do a schema export, moving that file to object store, and then another command to do an import to any database that we can connect to in OCI. Now, data pump has a million flags and parameters. We're not surfacing them all, but this is what our V1 list of parameters is going to look like. So yeah, you're going to be able to remap schemas. Hey, I'm HR here, but over here I'm HR2. You can enable compression. You can specify the actual name of the dump file if you want. You can tell us where to put stuff. And I think there's a few more we've added since I took the screenshot. But this is not 1,000% replacement for the data pump command line or the data pump API. These are the things that we see people using the most that we're going to make easy for you to use on the command prompt. Okay, so JavaScript. So here's everything the database can do. Here's everything CLCl can do. And then let's add on top of that everything we can do in a powerful scripting language like JavaScript. So if you're willing to get into the weeds a little bit, you can write, what is this, 10 lines of real code. It's nicely commented because our boss requires comments, but you can say, hey, let's interact with my command execution environment. Let's do things like run SQL statements. But instead of bringing the results back as like a printed page of results, here I'm doing something that's like, hey, go get some blobs out of this table and write them as files on the local operating system. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 lines of code. I then call this, so at the script name, it's found 7 rows in a table that's got blobs, and it's written them out as local files on my machine. So I think, Chris, you've got 30 or so examples in a GitHub project of all the cool things you can do with JavaScript to interact with your environment. What's the fun one you've done recently? Oh, he figured out a way to send messages from CLCl to Slack. And I think you also found a way to print the status of something to the status bar. I forget what you were reading from.
My Zoom mute status.
Yes, your Zoom mute status. It's not a red light, but it's like, hey, you're on mute, dummy. So tons of things we can do with that. Now, the only that's not a caveat, but the thing you need to be aware of, the way we make the JavaScript engine available is via Nashorn or via Graal VM. And in newer versions of Java, the Nashorn script engine is not included. So you either have to go and grab it yourself or get an older version. You need like Java 8 or Java 11. And that's only included on the Java Development Kit, the JDK. So if you're on the JRE, the script stuff won't work. But there is a way to make it work. We just got to spend a couple minutes to configure your environment. Now, if you've got SQL Developer running on your machine, that means you've already got a JDK somewhere. So you're going to be able to probably use this without a lot of work. I left almost no time to talk about Liquibase. With your permission, we're going to go over about 5 minutes. So versioning application schemas has been a problem for organizations for a very long time, and it's forced customers to basically build their own release management practices and processes and procedures. And if you asked Oracle, hey, what's the best way to version stuff? We'd kind of like say customers have done this. So 2 years ago, or maybe 2.5, 3 years ago, we surveyed the community. There's 2 really popular open source projects. Liquibase is one, Flyway is the other. Both are great. Both are done with Java. We saw more Oracle customers using Liquibase, so we grabbed that one. It's built into CLIs. So same code, same commands. It's just we surface them with this Liquibase command in CLIs. So I can say Liquibase update in CLIs, and that will apply a change log using Liquibase on the current database. But we wanted to enhance it. So we wanted to make it as nice as possible for Oracle customers. So here's the main things we tackled. One, you don't have to hand code your change logs. And what a change log is, it's sort of like instead of an RPM for your software, it's a representation of what you want the database state to look like once that's been applied. So that could be something that describes a table and its constraints and even the data in that table. So if you take that change log and you apply it on a system, the system can go, oh, hey, you already applied that change log. We don't need it. Or it could say, oh, this hasn't been run yet. Go grab that. Or it could also say, hey, there's a dependency for this change log to run. We also need this one. So it handles that. So you get a nice sort of like an RPM environment experience for the database. Things can go wrong. So you can back changes out. So there's a rollback. To do rollbacks, you have to write code. So, how do we roll back the change of adding a column to a table? There's a couple ways to do that. So someone would have to write that code. So what we've done is we've automated the generation of those change logs. We can say, do your normal schema work. When you've got that state to how you want it to look like other places, then you can say gen object or gen schema. And then we say, oh, okay, we'll generate those changelog files for you. And then when they're applied to the system, the database is smart enough to go, oh, this is what we need to get from point A to point B to make this thing happen. And then if I screw up and say I applied the wrong changelog, I can just do a simple rollback. And we've also automated the rollback bits. We know how to undo stuff. The other thing I really love is we've done our best to solve as closely as possible the creation order challenge. So you've got a schema of types, stored procedures, views, tables, synonyms. Everyone knows, hey, you've got to create the types first, then you've got to create the tables, then you've got to create the views, then you've got to create the synonyms, then you've got to create the procedures. It's a lot of math there. So we have built into our engine, hey, once we've generated all of the code, go parse that code, look for those dependencies, and then order those change logs such that when you apply them, we never run into the, hey, you're trying to create the table and it's dependent on this type and the type hasn't been created yet. So that's fixed. And then finally, what we've done is we've said, instead of using Liquibase's code for doing Oracle work, use our code. So on, I think the Liquibase side, they have like a change log that can represent a table and a view, and then they have a SQL type of change where you hand code stuff. Our change logs support every type of table you've ever thought of, any partitioning scheme you've ever thought of, any Oracle database object type you've ever thought of. And then the other thing we did is instead of having like a really generic SQL language you have access to the entirety of what SQLcl can do in a SQL-based change log. This is like an hour-and-a-half presentation on its own. I've got a screenshot of it here. I'll add the link to this when we post this with the description, but if you just do a YouTube search on Brian Spendolini and CI/CD Oracle, you should find this video. It's also on my blog if you want to go there. Here's an example of what we've done on the cloud support stuff. So basically what we've done is said, hey, let me set up my credentials in a database. If you're using DBMS Cloud, if you're familiar with that, you know what that is. Hey, here's my OCI profile STK environment. I've got that config. Now let me go and make API calls against my cloud environments. Let me go talk to things directly out of cloud storage or those S3 style buckets in the object store. That's all built in. So if you're not using Oracle Cloud yet, just know if you ever get there, there's a real lot of niceties built into SQLcl that just allows you to take advantage of all the power of Oracle Cloud. So here I'm doing that same thing we did earlier, set my SQL format, wrote it to a file. And then after it was done, I said, hey, go put this file in this object store bucket. And it did that. And it said, hey, it's there. Once it's there, I said, hey, SQLcl, go peek into that bucket, which is this file, and show me the first few lines of what's in there, which is nice too. And there's like access to basically the entirety of the OCI REST APIs. So you could theoretically, from inside of a SQLcl session, go create a new database cloud service instance if you wanted to. All right, so ending things on a couple of fun stuff. Alias is a super powerful command where you can basically just build your shortcuts in. So I'm always doing object searches. So I created a command called fuzzy. So alias fuzzy equals, and I type out the query. And then bind parameters will get mapped to positioned arguments. So I think I only have the one in here. Yeah, name. So alias fuzzy equals this. Once it's burned in here, it remembers it going forward. So now I can just say fuzzy imp %, and it substitutes this for this. It runs it, and then there's my results. You can get much more complicated than this. For example, I've got a script that goes and queries $session for CPU load by session and module. And I'm going to turn SQLcl into a little dummy monitor. So I've got a repeat command. So I can say in this case, repeat 20 times with the 1 second duration, my CPU command. And then it runs the query, prints the results to the screen, waits for that timer delay, clears the screen, reruns the query, reprints the results. So you can kind of see these numbers bouncing up as I'm doing different things. And if you want to see what's in my CPU command, alias list CPU, that's what's running. So I don't have to ever type that ever again. I can just type CPU and there's that. All right, we went 10 minutes over. I'm sorry I don't have cake for everyone. Next time we see you in person, I'll try to have cake. And 21.3.1 updated yesterday. Be sure to go get that. And then you can look forward to .21.4, where we have the data pump command. So we've added some stuff as you've seen. And we're also going to have, oops, I always do that, data guard. So the only gotcha on the data guard stuff is the PL SQL API that this command uses was introduced in 21C. But once you're on 21C or higher, you'll be able to do almost all of your data guard broker work directly in SQLcl. There's not a command in here to do the failover, but that is coming. All right. Hey, thanks everyone for your time. We really appreciate your feedback. That's what really drives this product. This product exists because you folks asked for it. It's in all of the places because you asked for it to be easier to get to. And we really crave that feedback. Maybe we were sort of needy on the attention side, but any one time you want to talk to us, Chris Rice, BT Spendo, that Jeff Smith on Twitter, we all run blogs. Our emails are pretty easy to guess. Let us know what we can do better. And we'll have another one of these sessions next month. I forget what the topic is. Brian, do you remember what we're doing next?
November, I don't think we know, but in December, as a sneaky peek, we are going to do database migration with CLIs.
Oh, yes. So more of the data pumpy type stuff.
Yeah.
That was one last question. Niels, if you name all of your bind parameters name, you'll get prompted once, and that value will get used for all of them. So get tricky and use like name 1, name 2, name 3 if you want, multiples. But it is smart enough to see if it's got the same parameter name, just to take in the one value and put it wherever that's referenced. Are there plans to package the JVM with CLIs? No, only because that would make the CLIs a lot bigger. And in general, to get a JRE, there's a lot of times it's already there. But that is the bare minimum you have to do before you can run our stuff, is you have to have Java. Now, if you grab SQL Dev, there is a Windows distribution with Java built in. So if you want to grab that thing, when you grab SQL Dev, it has with the JVM distribution on Windows 10, it has CLCL with it in the bin directory. So you can just go into the SQL Dev distribution, go to that bin directory, and you'll see that CLIs there. So that's the best I can offer you. If you're ready to grab 400 megs, you can get SQL Dev, CLCl, and the JVM all for Windows 64-bit. All right. Hey, thanks everyone again. We're going to stop the recording now. Look for that post